Welcome to Helping Leaders Achieve What Matters. Today we have with us Vistage expert speaker, Charles Bernard. Now, Charles received the 2020 Top Speaker Award. He's been a speaker for over 20 years for Vistage. He's also a Vistage member, which he's been a member of Vistage for 20 years. And his topic is sales. He's a sales expert, but what he's going to be talking about is sales and leadership. So to begin, welcome, Charles, and maybe tell us a little bit about how you got into this weird combination of sales and leadership.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Mark, and thank you for that very kind introduction. And I'm going to add to that introduction by saying that not only am I all the things you said in terms of being a member and a speaker, but I'm actually a member and you're my chair. So I feel double privileged to be speaking with you. And I just want to let everybody know who's listening or watching that I've been in your group for a long time. I've known you. I consider you a friend as well as my chair. And I want to take the opportunity to just thank you for your wisdom personally, but also your facilitation with the rest of the group. And I have to tell you, I've learned so many good things from that group that have helped me personally, as well as help my own business. So I just wanted to make sure that wasn't left unsaid, because I think it's really important to me.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So now that I said all that, what was the question?
Well, how did you get into sales? And you're going to be talking about leadership. So, most of the time, unless you're talking about sales leadership, like sales management, but you're talking about leadership, like this podcast is designed for CEOs and key executives of small to medium-sized businesses doing, from 10 million to 200 million in revenue.
Yes.
Sales have to do with leadership.
All right. So the first question, just quickly, how did I get into sales? Because I didn't start my career in sales. And it's interesting because I know a lot of salespeople, obviously, based on what I do. And I would tell you that many, maybe even the majority, I don't know the actual statistics, but a lot of people don't choose to go into sales right out of college, right? I'm just going to they sort of fall into it. And that's what happened to me. So my story about getting into sales started in my late 20s. I was employed by General Electric, one of these nice, great corporate companies, and all the stories you've heard about Jack Welch and all of that I experienced on the inside. And I have to say, most of it is true. It's a real great company. But I was on assignment as a software engineer. I was the lead at one of our clients, Mobil Oil. And through a whole series of happenstance that I won't bore you with, I ended up finding out about a project that was at Mobil because I happened to be in the cafeteria. And when you're a consultant, you get to use the cafeteria. And I overheard an opportunity that was really large. And they were looking for an army of consultants. They went out to bid. Long story short, we got on the bid list. And coincidentally, the account executive for Mobil at that time had just left. And there was no account executive. So I was sort of like the de facto. My boss said, hey, put your ear to the ground, find out information. And I met with the person that was in charge of that project, very senior person. His name's Irv K. And I'm very happy to put his name out there because he's one of those few people that made an instrumental difference in my career. And so you can imagine I'm getting all the requirements. And then at General Electric, we formed a team to create the proposal. And because of my technical background, I was very involved in the proposal. We brought in the top brass of General Electric, a guy by the name of Kevin Scherer, who actually became CEO of Amgen, very, very well-known guy. But at the time, he was head of our division. And we went over there as a team. And then last minute, unbeknownst to me, my boss taps me on the shoulder and says, "Thanks, Charles, great work. You can go back to your software development. We got it from here." And I got to tell you, Mark, there was one of those moments in people's careers, certainly in my career, where I had to make a choice. And it was almost like an out-of-body experience. The elevator doors opened, and I almost like out of body found myself walking into the elevator with these guys, and the elevator closed and we're heading up to the executive suite. They're doing a double take, and I hear this voice in the elevator. It happens to be my voice saying, "If it's okay with you, I'm going to join." I walk in. This was back in the day when, executive vice presidents had these monster offices with couches and coffee tables. So my boss says, "Sit on the couch, keep your mouth shut, make notes. We got it from here." And they're doing something that nowadays I would instruct everybody not to do. It's all features and benefits and how great we are, blah, blah, blah. And so it's almost like a clown show, honestly. And I'm watching Irv, who's the guy listening to all this, and I could tell he wasn't that amused. And he does one of these timeouts and he says, "You see that guy," pointing to me, "on the couch? That's the only reason you're in this office. And if it's all the same with you, I'd like him at the table." So they pull up a chair, fast forward, we get the deal on one condition. And the condition is that Irv, a great leader, someone I talk a lot about in terms of leadership, said, "You're only going to get this project if Charles is the account executive." So that was my accidental, maybe accidental on purpose way of getting into sales. And it ended up being the #1 multi-million project in GE's history at the time in that division. And I know you might be answering or you might be asking, why did he do that? Like, why would this guy who was very, very senior and me, who was very, very junior, no sales experience, pick in front of these executives, me, to be the person running the account? And I've had a lot of time, obviously, to think about it because it happened a long time ago. And I think, Mark, what struck me is he knew that he was making my career. He knew that GE had awesome resources. And he knew, based on how committed I was in generating the proposal and winning the deal, that I would give him whatever was in my power. So in a way, he was a really smart guy to be able to take, who he obviously had confidence in, me, to be able to do whatever it took for him and his project to succeed. And I've never forgotten that lesson. I think there's something there about leadership. I know you get into that a lot, so maybe you can see it. I don't.
I do. I mean, you and I have talked about what is the difference between leadership and management. And one of the differences is that leaders are risk takers. Managers aren't supposed to take risks. They're supposed to make sure the system goes according to the way that it's supposed to go. So you took a risk by going in the elevator and saying, "I'd like to join you guys." So that's what I think was an act of leadership.
And great observation, he took a risk. Think about it. I mean, he had a multi-million-dollar 3-year project on my shoulders, right? I mean, I was an unproven entity. So I love that. I love the idea that we're both taking risks. Yeah.
So how does sales connect to leadership?
Well, I really boil it down to a number of things. Like, the first thing philosophically I like people to be aware of is if you think of yourself as a salesperson, and you miss that as a salesperson, you're a leader, I think you've missed a big part of your job description. So speaking from a sales perspective, there is no question, at least speaking from experience, that when I'm in a lead role position of bringing in revenue and I've got a big deal, the smartest leaders are the ones who say, "We don't have a hierarchy, you're it." And the CEO oftentimes has said to me, when it comes to a deal, When it comes to a client, I work for you. But wait a minute, you're the CEO of the company. I'm a lowly salesperson. That got drilled into me at GE day one. They said, no titles. If you're sales and you are the account executive, you're the leader. We follow you because you know the account better. So I think sales people have to act as leaders because they are. They lead their own organizations, and in a way, they lead their clients. They lead their clients to accomplish big outcomes. So I think all of that to say that I've broken out a couple of distinct areas where I think there's commonalities. And one is in relationship building. So if you look at salespeople, everyone talks about, at least everyone I talk to in a B2B world, tends to say things like, sales is all about relationships. Well, I could also say leadership is all about relationships. They may be different in terms of where you're coming from, but in reality, what I like to do is challenge people, you know that. So when I hear that, when salespeople say to me and leaders say to me, you know, it's about relationships, I'm like, what does that mean? And what I've discovered, Mark, is that a lot of salespeople, when they're talking about sales as a relationship business, are really talking about likability. And I think the same for leaders. Like a lot of leaders want to be liked. A lot of salespeople want to be liked. A lot of salespeople will say, well, you know, the reason people do businesses with me is because they like and trust me. And my argument to that, and I hope that doesn't offend anybody, is I think that's table stakes. Like that's okay, that's like granted. No one wants to do business with someone they don't like and trust. But think of a leader, same thing. It's like, do you want to be liked as a leader, or do you want to be respected, or do you want to respect? And so when you start asking what is a relationship and really what does that mean, I like to use a word that I think applies to both sales and leaders, and that is workability. And for me, I want relationships with clients that work. And I would oftentimes encourage, and I do this for myself, so I like to practice what I preach, is tell people what that means. Like, for example, in my company, we have this philosophy when we're working with clients like you, that we define workability that has three components. And then I'm going to show you how I think those three to a leader. So from a sales perspective are feedback. Like, tell me, if you're a salesperson and you don't get feedback, and I mean timely feedback, I would argue you don't have a relationship. You know, a classic example is I send you a proposal and you don't get back to me. And now I'm wondering, did you get my proposal? Where do I stand? So timely feedback is a definition. I think the same is true for leadership. You know, you've got to give feedback and you've got to encourage people to give you feedback so you know where you stand.
So the first point that I heard you say is that the common principle between sales and leadership is workability.
Workability.
And workability is defining how our relationship is going to work together. And so you're setting out what your expectations are as a leader or as a salesperson. One of them is that we're going to have timely feedback.
Two-way, right?
Two-way, yeah. So if I make a request of you, you're going to respond, and I might even define what that is within 24-hour period of time or within 4-hour period of time. If I'm the CEO, I expect my people that they would respond within an hour of my time, I think, depending on the urgency of the issue. And then they might push back and say, well, that would work for me, except that I'm not going to respond to you after 6 p.m. or I'm not going to respond on the weekends because I want to set a boundary between, my family and work-life balance. And then they could negotiate that. Is that what you're referring to?
100%. I think you hit on something else that I think leaders are oftentimes think they take it for granted that other people understand. And unless they really make it clear, people don't know what the expectations of the leader are. So now I'm doing what I think you want me to do. And then you come back and tell me it wasn't what you expected or wanted. And I'm like, well, you didn't really tell me what it was in the first place. So 100% agree with you, like making those expectations clear, both as a leader to your employees and as a salesperson to your client, 100%. So I think that's number one. Number two on the sales side is, I think we have workability if my company and me as a salesperson continue to add value. And what I like to do is give people examples, like, because if I don't, they kind of assume and they don't know. Same like what we were talking about. Adding value is, I like to ask a lot of questions, and I tell my clients that. And it's not because I want to be nosy or bug them. The reason I ask questions is because I need to understand their challenges and expectations, like you just said, so that I can provide solutions that add value. So I'm more invested in solving problems than making a sale. That's number one on the client side. For the leader, adding value is really critical, because I'll tell you what I see that doesn't add value. And I think leaders could learn a lot from this. Number one, there are many leaders that are bottlenecks. I don't think they intend to be a bottleneck, but they're not adding value because they're sitting on a decision. Like if I'm a VP of sales and I'm reporting to the president and I'm asking the president to bless a contract, or I'm asking the president to bless a compensation plan, and I sent that person an email a week ago, and for whatever reason, my boss, my leader isn't getting back to me, they've now become a bottleneck and I'm stuck. So I think leaders need to be responsive. That's part of adding value. Even if the response is, got your email, don't have time, like you said, don't have time, it's the weekend, I'll get back to you next week or whatever. Set an expectation that I know that I can hold you accountable, because I think accountable goes both ways. And then lastly, I think this goes almost without saying, but it's important to call out, is leaders have to honor their word, because they have an expectation that the people that report to them are going to honor their word also. I'll give you a real classic story, kind of similar to what I just said. Honoring your word, an example could be, I think personally, it's a mistake if you're a head of sales and you don't have a new compensation plan, because most comp plans change year after year. The time to roll it out is January 1. Or even before January 1, like the last week in December. Do you know what I see a lot? I see comp plans being rolled out Q1, Q2. And the problem with that is, number one, I didn't honor my word because I said the comp plan would be due, January 1. And this actually happened. We get a problem, because if you don't roll a comp plan for the year until midway through the year or 3 months into the year, imagine if a salesperson closes a contract. What comp plan do they think they're going to get paid on?
The one that they have.
Right? The last one.
Right.
And then in this example, are like, oh, no, we changed the comp plan, but you never showed me. So, you're telling me I'm going to make less this year than last year? Well, I may have chosen not to make that sale and go after a different type of sale. So I think honoring your word is important. Obviously, I think sales is the same. If you are going to deliver a proposal, you make a promise when it's going to get delivered and you honor your word. So I think that's all kind of part and parcel of workability, right?
So workability, what I'm hearing you say is the last thing is really what I would call integrity. I mean, if you want people to trust you as a leader, you need to have integrity by doing what you say you're going to do when you're going to do it. And that's also true in sales. If you want to have a reputation and succeed as a salesperson, you need to honor your word. Otherwise, you're not going to get a second order from someone. And then the second thing that you said about workability was then adding value and asking questions. And the tie that I see to the leadership there is that leadership's job for me is to grow leaders.
Yes.
And if people are coming to me with a problem and I'm just solving the problem, then I'm not growing leaders. I just become the shell answer man. And almost every leader that I talk to complains about the lack of time. And I'm not really scaling because I become the bottleneck that you talked about. So, really, the way that I can add value as a leader using this principle would be to start asking questions like a salesperson would ask questions, to have them start thinking on their own and coming up with ideas on their own, and guiding them and mentoring and developing them so that the next time they're not coming to me with the same issue. Is that on target?
That's on target. And I'll go one step further and say what you're saying bleeds into the second principle, I think, of both leadership and salespeople, and that is accountability. And it's another one of those phrases that I hear a lot. And I think it gets thrown around and it's like, oh yeah, everyone knows what it means. And then you ask someone, what does it mean? And they're like, I don't really know what it means. I kind of, well, people honor their promises. It's very hard to kind of create like you were saying, a set of expectations for accountability. And when I get a new client, I can tell whether they have a culture of accountability everywhere, not just in sales and leadership, by how they answer these two questions. Question number one is, are your people setting goals? And you'd be amazed, at least it amazes me, Mark, how many people say, no, we don't do that. We tried that. It doesn't work. I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, too much pressure. People don't like having, to be under the gun to create goals. And I'm like, well, that's problem number one. If you want people to be accountable, what are you holding them accountable to if they don't have goals? And the second, which is a little more gnarly, I think, to deal with, and that is, are they publishing their goals, at least to the manager? And people go, why is that important? And I say, well, the reason it's important, it might not be what you think. Like, yes, I publish my goals because if you see my goals, you can hold me accountable. But that's not really what I mean. Or at least I don't think that's the most powerful piece of publishing the goals. What I think is lacking, and what's really important from a leadership standpoint, is that goals have to align. So if you're my CEO, Mark, you set goals for the company. And I would expect, if I'm the CEO, that my executive team, all the people that report to me, their goals align with my goals. And the people that report to them, their goals align to their goals. And so publishing allows us to check in and say, well, those are good goals, but they don't really seem to be aligned to the direction we want to go. It doesn't seem to hit the forecast for the year, or it doesn't seem to hit the growth targets that we have, because we want to grow a certain number of accounts, we want to sell a new product, we want to open it, yada, yada, right?
Yeah.
So accountability starts with goal setting, I think.
Yeah, and I see that in sales. We call it a quota in sales, at least when I was in sales. And it was very clear what your quota was, and it was on the wall. And if you were above quota, you were in good graces. If you were below quota, you might have some meetings that you have to attend, and some additional training that you have to attend, and some coaching that you might have to receive. In business, the connection that I'm seeing between leadership is, again, we're talking about setting expectations. One of the systems that probably about a third of my members are using now is called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS.
EOS, very familiar with it, yes.
EOS sets specific goals for like a quarter, and every single person on the team has one of these goals, and they meet weekly, and every single week they have to say whether they're on track or off track for that goal. Yes. And if they're off track for that goal, then it goes on a flip chart or a whiteboard or whatever technology somebody's using to identify, discuss, and solve whatever challenge or issue they're having for being off track. So I mean, to me, that's the clarity that leaders need to have with their people, and the accountability is really just reporting on it and seeing where people are, and then figuring out, well, how can I help them achieve this goal? Is it something that's a skill that's missing, a resource that's missing? What can I do as the leader so that we're all on track?
So I have one for you on that thread that you just said, which is, and I discovered this accidentally. It's not like I came up with it and then tried to use it with a client. A client taught me this. What I discovered was, so there was a client that had an investor, a PE company. And, it's like everybody, when the company's doing great, the PE company, the investors leave you alone. Then all of a sudden you don't hit targets, and now everyone's crawling in and out of your laundry, right? So in this situation, what the investors were saying, which was logical, is, do you have KPIs for the sales team? Yes, we do. Well, can't you take the best salesperson and apply all the KPIs to everybody? And then that's when I had a gigantic realization that as a leader, whether you're leading other leaders, like you said, or whether you're leading a sales team, it's difficult to lay the same KPIs on everybody. I think you really have to know who you're dealing with. So I'll give you a very concrete example. In my opinion, on a sales team, not all salespeople are equal. You've got your A players, they're probably bringing in 80% of the revenue. And then you got the B players and your C players. And I'm not criticizing and arguing that it's not okay to have C's and B's. In some cases, you want C's and B's because they're doing different things than your A's, and you need those. An example, B's and C's, certainly C players, they're doing a lot more cold outreach than an A player. An A player will say, I'm not doing that because I'm going to go to lunch with one of my top clients and I'm going to come back with $1 million order. A C player doesn't even have the ability to go to lunch. They're going to be crunching through outreach and cold calling and all of that stuff. So it dawned on us that KPIs from a leadership perspective have to match the capabilities of the people you're dealing with. And therefore, top performers, to some extent, you could say everyone has to do the baseline. Okay, but for top performers, there's probably a certain set of special KPIs that or different KPIs that you're going to apply. And I think an enlightened leader is someone who is able to adjust. It's kind of like, what's that one? You know what it is. It's situational leadership, right? It's like you've got different people in different kind of stages of their development. And I think that's both from a sales perspective and from a leadership perspective, very similar.
And I think, again, it's negotiated, that we're heading towards, this is our aim. What are you going to do to help us get there? This is an area that we're having a problem, which might be your quarterly priority goal for rock or whatever you want to call it. And you're defining what is success. What is it that is going to show up at the end of 3 months that we succeeded? And as I recall, the coaching on that is that a 10-year-old would be able to say that you achieved that goal or you didn't achieve that goal. It's got to be so concrete that a 10-year-old would be able to determine that a fuzzy goal, like, we're going to have more sale, whatever that means.
Yeah, and I'll add to that by saying that I think on the leadership side, it almost goes without saying, like you said, quarterly goals, rocks in EOS language. And then people go, well, how can I apply that to sales? And I say, because a lot of people think, well, the metric for sales is you sell more, you get paid more. You get a base salary and commission, you sell more, you make more money. Well, and you got a quota. What I like to do, and I borrow this from what you just said on the leadership side, is I'm a real fan of adding quarterly MBOs like rocks to salespeople. So in other words, Charles, you're a top performer. Your MBOs for the quarter, you got 3. I'm going to give you a revenue number. I'm going to give you a number to get new accounts, and I'm going to give you something else that I'm going to measure you on. That quarterly objective is likely to be different than another salesperson who may not be a top performer. Regardless, the MBO, the management by objective, that's what it stands for, allows you to tweak performance to match the person. And I think that's true on the leadership side, right? You know, each one has different quarterly goals, or each department or each person. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. So that's kind of like pushing accountability. So I think there's a lot of similarities there. The other one I think is difficult. This is going to be a little hard, and I might need your help, but I do think clear communication, like communication, in of itself is like in the toolbox for a leader. And I think it's in the toolbox for a salesperson, right? I mean, if I'm a salesperson, I can't communicate, like I can't communicate my solution, I can't communicate my value, I can't communicate my 30-second intro effectively, that's a problem. But I also think the same applies for leadership. Like my tool in my trade is my ability to do everything we've just talked about. Clearly set communication, clearly set expectations. What I go, though, is a little deeper, and it sort of fits into what we said about workability, but at a deeper level. And that is that if you're a leader, your tool in trade is communication and all the people within you. I would almost argue communication and culture are almost the same. Like we talk about culture, and it's another one of those myths. Like, what does that mean? I talk about conversations, and I think there are certain conversations that you might want to be aware of as a leader, and certainly as a salesperson, that drive results, performance, action. And I'll tell you where I learned this, because I'm a big student of a lot of things. You know, not a lot originated with me. I just learned stuff from you and many other people. There is a guy called J.L. Austin from the 1950s, who's a British philosopher in language. And he said, in the philosophy of language, there are words that perform. And it just blew me away when I read this guy's work. And one of the examples he gives is that certain words literally cause things to happen. For example, a promise, meaning if I say the word promise, I'm promising by saying I promise. If I say the word hand, the word hand is not itself a hand, it's describing something. So he says there are performatives. And so as a leader, I think it's really important that we start to manage or be aware of the types of conversations that are going on in our department or in our sphere of influence as a leader. So promises is one. Another powerful one is requests. You know, it's funny. I'll sitting on a meeting and people are batting around ideas, and no one's actually saying, "Can I ask when we're going to do that by?" That's a request. If I'm a salesperson and a prospect says to me, "Send me a proposal," and I don't make a request, I'm also setting myself up for failure, because you know, the request might be, great, I'll send you that proposal. Can I ask when you're going to review that? Can we calendar that time? Where is it written that you can't make requests? But I go even deeper than that and say, there are conversations that create problems. And I would say gossip is a type of conversation that if you're a leader and either you're not aware of the gossip or you're even part of the gossip, like if you're gossiping about your boss, what do you think everyone that works for you thinks?
Yeah.
Right?
And gossip about me when I'm not in the room.
So I think gossip is a big problem. And I think, you know, so in other words, communication and certain conversations that drive results matter. So what you say, how you communicate, to your point, clarity in setting expectations, et cetera, is really, really important.
So what I heard here is that the other common principle, a sales principle that helps leaders is to communicate effectively.
Yes.
And to communicate effectively, there are certain types of conversations that are conversation for action. And those are conversations where I request X by Y. And somebody else comes back and says, okay, I promise to do X by Y. So now you have something to hold them accountable. You have a clear communication.
And there are other types that are more accessible to a leader than maybe a salesperson. You could argue maybe sales, but certainly leadership. There's another type, which is declaration. Like a leader will say, we're doing this project, and they're declaring the timeline, they're declaring the expectations, and people go, well, why is that important? Like, why are you calling that out? That's kind of obvious. Well, I think you have to be aware of the responsibility that you have when you make declarations. So a classic example is, again, it's a speech act. Like, think about when someone gets married,
Yes.
right? You've got a person who says, I declare you married. You are not married until that person makes that declaration. You can think you're married, but until the justice of the peace says these two parties are married, they're not. So it's a declaration. And I think leaders have to kind of, at the end of the day, be aware of the weight of their word, and not to just throw it around lightly, that people really listen to what's being said. And again, it goes back to that. But, you know, one thing that I missed to say, and I'd be curious if you agree with me, because it was your comment about the hub and spoke, where you're the middle and you develop other leaders. You know, COVID was a big example of leaders struggling with accountability. And I would ask them, well, why is that a problem? They said, well, you know, when everyone was in the office, I could see them.
Yes.
I could sort of like, oh, they're productive, I can see. Well, now they're at home, I can't see them. So I go, well, what do you do? Well, now I have to work twice as hard, calling them, doing daily huddles, et cetera. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot of work. I go, that makes you kind of the center of everything, because you're chasing everybody, right? Like, do you do that with one-on-one meetings with your salespeople and your direct reports? Oh, yeah. I go, well, no wonder you're exhausted at the end of the day. That's a lot of work, because you're in the middle of everything. And what I loved about your example is that I think you need to, as a leader, when you're developing other leaders especially, you want to create a culture of managing up. And my way of describing that, I'm not sure where that fits, Mark, but I think it's worth calling out.
Okay.
Because it's like that example of the salesperson managing the rest of the organization. You're the CEO. I know you're the boss of the company, but in this situation, I'm managing you. So that manage up culture, I think, is something that's going to relieve a lot of that problem, certainly during COVID, where now the employees are placing demands on the leader. Now employees are scheduling, not only scheduling the meetings, like, I need to meet with you weekly, Wednesday mornings, does that work? Yeah. And I say, well, what else do you want them to do? Who sets the agenda? Does the leader set the agenda, or does the person who benefits the most set the agenda? So they should be. So in other words, this whole idea of managing up, I think, gets brushed under the carpet a lot. And I think it applies to both sales and leaders.
Yeah, what I hear there is, I don't know about demands that employees can make on their CEOs, but requests, going back to your requests. I mean,
Yeah, okay.
in a spectrum from a I ask to I demand. And what you were saying earlier about declarations, I'll tie it into that, is that CEOs, like you said, don't know the power of their words. So I often hear of breakdowns where, why didn't this project get done? Well, you said that it would be nice to have such and such included as a new feature in the software. And so we've spent, 2 weeks working on that, and it delayed the whole project. And it's like, I never meant for you to work on it. I was just saying that would be a nice thing to have. And so it wasn't a clear declaration that this is a different feature that I want in here in this software, and I want you to delay the implementation. Or a question like, if I add this feature, are we still going to be able to get this project done on time? Or a comment from the person, the requestee receiving it, saying, I'm listening that you're making a declaration that you want this new feature in the software, and we can do that, but the consequence of that is that we're going to be 2 weeks later in delivering the entire project. So that's what I hear is the clear communication that needs to happen for effective leadership.
Yes, and so I'll give you another example because we're talking a lot on the leadership side. I want to tell you on the sales side, this is a real situation, and I think it goes right to what you were saying. So I was recently privileged to run sales interimly with an organization, and what we had is conflict between marketing and sales. And what was happening is that the salespeople were asking marketing for one-pagers and improvements in the decks. And they were like throwing rocks at marketing because marketing wasn't giving it to them, and everything they gave them was crap, and they didn't like it, and they said their clients would hate it, and blah, blah, blah. So I started asking, why are you placing that request? Back to your example, because I think not all requests need to be accepted, right? Some requests are more valid than others. And in this situation, sales was convinced that marketing had to come up with the perfect one-pager so they could send it to their clients. So I said, well, okay, give me an example. So we had this one client who was in one division talking to the salesperson, and they needed the other division to be involved. And their idea was, can you send me something that I can give to the head of the other division that describes what you do and the value? So they were like, well, I don't know, I'm going to ask marketing. And marketing was giving them stuff that they didn't like. And then I said, why? And they were like, what do you mean? Well, just because the person's asking for a piece of marketing, does that mean that's what they want? Because isn't the goal that they want the other person to be involved? And you're putting the onus on marketing, and you're placing a demand on marketing that's spinning their wheels, and it's inappropriate. And what we came down to was that the person at the client just was ignorant. They just thought a one-pager was what they needed. And in reality, it wasn't what they needed. What they really needed was this other person to have a conversation with the salesperson. Let's understand your goals. Let's understand your challenges. And then we can give you something that matches that. But a third-party marketing, head of marketing isn't going to know. They don't have access to that. So your point's well taken, that I think when we place these demands on each other, we have to be really clear why we're asking for something and what's the result. And it may
And I
very
would
well
change
be.
that word demands to request.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying.
Sounds like I have the power and the authority, and I demand that you get this done by Tuesday versus, Charles, we could really benefit from this one pager, and I'm requesting that you do this one pager by Tuesday, and you have the freedom to say no.
Or you have the freedom to say, why? Help me understand why we're doing this, because there may be a different alternative, another solution, right? Just because you want this doesn't mean to say it's what's right, or it's so you're absolutely right. I think this idea of this give and take. So I think it goes back to communication. The other one that I think is really important, because it happens all the time, and that is, again, sales and leadership is dealing with setbacks. So for a salesperson, setbacks can be very easy sometimes to describe. Like a setback would be, I don't have a pipeline. That's a setback. Or a setback could be, I lost my top client, or I lost my top deal. I was working on this deal for a month, and all of a sudden they went with a competitor. So you asked me, actually, real situation. We had our meeting this week, and you said, what's your top quality? I forgot what the question was. And I was thinking about this example. So for me, it's resilience. And I think leaders have to be resilient also, but salespeople have to be resilient. What I mean by that is not resilient like taking rejection. Everyone can take rejection. Someone says no, no one's going to break a sweat. What I'm talking about is when you're behind the 8 ball and you're not on track with your targets. And you have to be resilient to not let your, what we call head trash, all those negative thoughts dominate and paralyze. And like, poor me, how did this happen? What am I going to do? Meanwhile, you're listening to all this, you're not doing anything.
Right.
So I'd be curious what your thoughts are, because I have some thoughts about leadership. Like there is a lot of situations where someone's underperforming and you're the leader. And what I've observed is that leaders have to be very careful, and this is really where I'd love your opinion, on managing people's head trash or their negative thoughts. Like if a leader says, listen, you underperformed, you didn't deliver, something didn't work, I want to help you, tell me what happened. I would argue that a lot of the time you get people's what they think happened versus what really happened, or their interpretation of what happened, which is polluted with a lot of self-doubt, etc. So what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that I think a good leader is able to filter out things that are negative thoughts, blame, shame, guilt, and not deal with it, because I think that's a slippery slope. Because if you give me a lot of head trash and I'm interacting with that, I'm giving you sympathy and I'm trying to make you feel better and all of that, we've now wasted a lot of time dealing on a low return conversation, as opposed to if I'm a leader trying to coach you to help you discover how to get out of this situation or improve. I think I want to be looking at what happened. What did you do? What did the other party do? And let us together look at new possibilities based on fact rather than fiction. Does that kind of clue in? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, one of my teachers, Julio Alala, once said that the right conversation in the wrong mood is ineffective. So if somebody's feeling sorry for themselves and they just had this huge setback and their head trash, as you're calling it, is going, I don't know if that's the time to have the conversation of what to do next.
Yes.
And maybe, you can be compassionate and say that must be really hard for you. And I'm sorry that happened. And let's schedule another meeting and talk about what our action plan is or what our plan B is or something like that. Because until they shift out of that, the head trash is going to keep on going and going and going. And even though I know as a CEO that sometimes it feels like that we have to be business psychologists, we're really not we're not trained in how to deal with it that well. All we can be is human beings and compassionate, have some empathy, but then we have to get back to business.
So I don't know what category I would put that in, but I think it's worth putting it in a category, which is, as a leader and you want to help someone, but their headspace isn't there. There's a certain, maybe it's EQ, Mark, there's a certain, you got to read the tea leaves and know, I know I have something to say and valuable to offer, but I also got to check where the person's at. And to your point, if they're not giving you permission to coach them, we have an acronym called playback, and the first letter P is permission to coach. To your point, we don't want anyone coaching somebody if they haven't given you permission. And sometimes we assume they have given us permission, but really their head isn't in it. And to your point, maybe they need to, because if they can get out of that cycle, that negative spiral, they can be more objective and probably,
right.
Yeah. And then the last thing I think I would say, if you would ask me, like, what's a big dot, what's a couple of dots that are really big to connect between sellers and leaders, I would say problem solving is a really big one. And I'll start with a common philosophy that I don't like, and you're probably going to not like it because you've probably got a lot of people who say this, but I don't like it. And that is, a lot of leaders go around saying everyone in the company is in sales. And the problem with that is that a lot of your employees will hear you as the leader say everybody's in sales, and they'll think, I don't like sales. I don't want to be in sales. In fact, I hate sales and I hate salespeople. If I wanted to be in sales, I'd be a salesperson. So I think a better way that I think gives people more of the ability to opt in is we're a problem-solving organization and everyone is part of the solution. And it doesn't matter where you are in the organization, you can be empowered to be part of the solution. whether you're delivering something or you're getting coffee for somebody. I mean, that's making them be more productive because they didn't have to waste time doing it. So all I'm saying is that, problem solving is a big one for me, for leaders and for salespeople. And therefore, if I take the analogy to the next level, I'll say salespeople shouldn't think of themselves as salespeople. They should think of themselves as problem solvers. And if they think of themselves as problem solvers, you get a guy like me who coaches people like salespeople. My question to them is, okay, if you're a problem solver, what do you need lots of? And it's funny, there's kind of 50% in each category. Some people will say you need a lot of solutions. I'm like, okay, but you need something before that.
You need lots of problems.
You need lots of problems. So what I want to help salespeople and leaders, because I think they're one and the same in this example, is what are we solving for? And, I think it's a privilege. In fact, I think it's an honor when a buyer trusts me enough to tell me what their real problems. I don't mean just like surface problems. I mean, like, no, I have a real problem. I have a broken supply chain. And we don't have trucks, and we don't have capacity, and we don't have cargo, and we can't get, that's putting us out of business. And therefore, I now know as a problem solver that I have a buyer who is genuinely invested in the conversation. I have to figure out how to draw the line to the leader. It's almost like, to your point earlier, if someone serves up a problem to the leader, expecting the leader to solve the problem, I think that's not cool. But if I come up to the leader with a problem, my leader, and I say, I got a problem, broken supply chain, something's not working, and here are 3 things that I'm thinking of doing, or here's a potential solution, or all I'm asking for as the leader is that if I'm being served up a problem, that I have a person equally invested in solving the problem as me. Because the moment someone gives me a problem and kind of waits patiently for me to give them the answer, I would argue they've lost being invested in the solution. And maybe that's my fault because I train them as a leader to do that. So we have a tool that you're familiar with. We've been using it for years called the Problem Opportunity Matrix. And what that does is it helps leaders, salespeople, marketing people collaborate together to identify what are the problems we as an organization solve. And if we can clearly articulate what they are, we could then give a list of those problems to a buyer and say, which one of these apply, as opposed to me asking you a million questions, trial and error to figure out if you got the problem or you don't. So I guess that's my wrap up in terms of I don't know what other dots. I'm sure there's more. But
I think we came up with 5 of them. We came up with workability.
Right.
We came up with communication. We came up with accountability, resilience, and dealing with setbacks were the 5 that I heard. Did I miss any?
No, I think that, we could argue there's more, right? But I think those are the ones that I feel are if we can resolve those for both salespeople and leaders, then we have a pretty healthy organization. Ultimately, and I'll leave you with my kind of wrapper for you, is whether you're a leader or a salesperson, I believe if you have this in common, you are a value add to your organization. And that is that you want to make a contribution. And I think if you're a salesperson, you want to make a contribution to a buyer because you're solving their problem, and they'll pay you, but that you're also giving them a solution and you made a contribution. And if you're a leader and you're making a contribution to the culture, to the organization, et cetera, then you're going to go home feeling like, you earned your pay.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Charles. This has been enlightening. I'm looking forward to you speaking to our Vistage group If any other Vistage chairs or anyone else listening to this podcast wants to find out more about you and criteria for success, what should they know?
Well, they should know how to contact me. So it's cbernard@criteriaforsuccess, all spelled out.com. Our website is criteriaforsuccess.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. I think it's Bernard1, but don't quote me on that. I think that's my LinkedIn handle. And I'm thrilled and honored if anyone wants to reach out and just, run an idea by me. I like to make contributions too.
Well, thank you, Charles. So this has been Helping Leaders Achieve What Matters with Charles Bernard.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.